Hello, everyone. John Hively here again. Way to go, protesters! Millions of Americans taken to the streets in something like more than 1,300 protests. People on the right, people on the left getting together to protest the Trump administration and potential cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Well, let me tell you something. I think it's a really good thing for that to occur. It happened in blue states. It happened in red states. The one thing the oligarchs of both major political parties fear is people getting together. People on the left, people on the right, getting together with common cause against the oligarchs. So let's talk about Social Security and the things you're not being told. Among other things, Social Security has a $2.5 trillion surplus. It collects about $180 billion a year in interest. Now, Social Security is going to have a cutbacks in about 10 years because that surplus is going to be gone. So what's the difference between, you want to see the difference, you want to hear the difference between what it was like in the 1950s and how democracy functioned and how it, and the 1980s and how the remnants of democracy then functioned and how it doesn't function now? Okay, let's take a look. 1952. Republican candidate for president Dwight D. Eisenhower, a moderate conservative for his times, was running on a campaign of strengthening Social Security. He's elected president, and in 1953, that's among the first things he did. That was democracy working. The 1980s, Ronald Reagan takes the presidency, an arch-conservative president, Republican president. And what does he do? Well, Ronald, the oligarchy was not in complete control, and they actually worried about what would happen to Social Security, and perhaps if it failed and it was looking like it wasn't in good shape, then maybe it's a good chance that people would have taken to the streets and threatened the looming the oligarchic takeover of the U.S. government. So what did Reagan do? He appointed a commission and that to figure out a way to make Social Security solvent. And guess what Reagan did? He made Social Security solvent, which is why there's $2.5 trillion in the Social Security Trust Fund today, collecting $180 billion in interest. Well, that's going to be gone as the boomers retire. Say in 10 years, if you're collecting Social Security, all of a sudden your Social Security benefits are going to be reduced by about 16%, 10 years from now, approximately. And what are the politicians, what are the oligarchs doing now? Well, they don't give a damn. They don't give a damn about you. They don't care whether you're left, whether you're right. They only care that they can manipulate you. So I'm going to tell you a few things that you're not going to hear about Social Security. First of all, according to a RAND study, that came out in 2018, about, I think it was like $48 trillion since 1976 had been taken. They used the word taken by the 1% from the bottom 90% of income earners. They did this by, the 1% did this by exporting jobs. And it's really the oligarchs who did this. They exported millions of American jobs. They brought in millions of foreigners working at lower pay, such as the H-1B visa, stuff like that. They did a lot of things. They maintained a very low federal minimum wage. Anyway, so the authors of that study also looked at what was occurring over the last several years before they published their study. And they found that about $2.5 trillion was still being taken per year. And if you extrapolate that into the future, say to the current time, 7 years later, about $68 trillion has been taken by the top 1% from the bottom 90%. Well, that threatens Social Security. Why? Let me bring out my mighty whiteboard, my high-tech whiteboard. So, since 1976, I think it was 76, it could have been 75 or so, $65 trillion has been taken from the bottom 90%. Well, that was taxed money. That's wages, salaries, etc. That's taxed by Social Security. 6.2% of Social Security taxation comes straight out of the employee's wages. 6.2%, the employer has to match it. So it's 12.4%. Well, if you take 12.4%, oh, wait, before let me get back to here. So since that's $65 trillion, almost none of that is taxed when it's held by the wealthy. And it's not taxed because they get most of their income, the wealthy, the top 1%, they get most of their income from dividends and capital gains. And those things are not taxed by Social Security. So $65 trillion taxed by Social Security by 12.4% equals $8.06 trillion that should be in the Social Security Trust Fund. You got that? It's not there because the billionaires have, the very wealthy, have taken it from the bottom 90%. Well, if you add that to the $2.5 trillion that's currently in the Social Security Trust Fund, that means the Social Security Trust Fund should have $10.56 trillion in it. And instead of collecting $180 billion a year, it should be collecting $760 billion a year. And you're not going to hear that anyplace else because no one's figured it out yet. But I did. Okay, so much for the whiteboard. But hopefully you understand that the massive income redistribution that's taken place over the last, say, since 1976, has impacted Social Security. And the wealthy have stolen from you, and they've stolen from the social, or let me use the phrase used by that RAND study, taken from you. And they've taken from Social Security in the process. Now look, if the protests continue, the oligarchs can't ignore it. And they're probably trembling in their boots right now. But maybe if the protests are not sustained, then they're not going to tremble in their boots. Because the last thing they want is an aroused population of people on the right and people on the left. And you're supposed to hate each other, by the way. They've made you hate each other, or at least a lot of you hate each other, just because you belong to a different political party, which is stupid, but that's what they do, the billionaires do. But the last thing they want is for those people to stop hating each other and to join together to fight the oligarchs. And Social Security is an issue where you guys get united, along with issues like Medicare and Medicaid, because both sides, both members of both political parties, large chunks of those political parties, those voters, rely on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So let me tell you how much, and I'm going to read this. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, hang on. I'm going to get there. So how much do you have in common with your neighbor down the street who you're supposed to hate because they belong to a different political party? Well, you have a lot in common, like the air you breathe, but also, Social Security. So the University of Maryland's program for public consultation, I'm reading this, surveyed 2,545 people in 2022 about possible changes to Social Security. 77% of Republicans and 86% of Democrats supported, the people who are supposed to hate each other, supported Social Security taxing incomes of $400,000 and above. Doing this would eliminate 61% of the expected shortfall 10 years from now. So, right now, Social Security has a cap on earnings, and I think it's right now about $168,000. So if you make via wages or salaries above $168,000, Social Security does not tax anything above that. Okay, so next. So the people basically of both major political parties want that cap eliminated. So 70% of Republicans and 78% of Democrats also favored raising the payroll tax rate from 6.2 to 6.5%. Well, that would strengthen Social Security. The study concluded that would eliminate 16% of the expected shortage. 75% of Republicans and 76% of Democrats want to gradually raise the retirement age from 67 to 68 years. Most of these respondents probably have no idea because that the mortality rate in the United States has dropped. I mean, you're likely to die sooner than your grandparents ever did right now if you're alive. So the lifespan of people is going down, and that's something you're not supposed to know about, by the way. The news media doesn't want you to know about it. Anyway, if you raise the retirement age by a year, The study concluded 14% of the shortfall would be covered by doing this. 78% of Republicans and 86% of Democrats favored reducing benefits for high earners. And why not? Why not have a progressive way of distributing to beneficiaries the Social Security benefits? Why not? I mean, if you're richer, why do you even need this? And you don't. Doing this would eliminate 11% of the shortage. Doing all of the above would cover the expected shortfall in 2034, and not a single recipient, the study concluded, would need to take a cut in benefits. However, despite massive bipartisan support, democracy doesn't exist in this nation unless you take to the streets. And the oligarchs are not going to do any of the above, because the last thing they want to do is they want to tax themselves. So the last thing they want to do is the last thing they really want to do is have you and your neighbors of different political parties getting together over this issue and kicking their asses. Because right now, because they have you divided, the billionaires have you divided, they have you hating your neighbor, they're kicking your ass. They're waging class warfare and kicking the ass of the bottom 99% of Americans. Well, anyway, keep up the good work. Take to the streets, keep up the protests, because unless you sustain these protests over a period of months or years, they're not going to do anything. So good luck and keep it up. Anyway, have a good day.